The funeral of Edmund Vane was, by all accounts, a perfectly conducted affair. The church was full, the flowers were white. The eulogies were the kind that describe a man's public achievements with sufficient warmth to suggest private virtue without committing to any specifics that might be contradicted. The widow stood at the graveside in correct black with correct composure. The son stood beside her. The daughter stood apart, as she had always stood apart from things, watching with her particular quality of attention that people found unsettling without being able to say precisely why. The solicitor was present. The business partners were present. The household staff were present in a respectful cluster near the lich gate, as tradition required. Everything was as it should be. And yet, Poirot was not at the funeral. He was at his desk at Whitehaven Mansions, reading the newspaper account of Edmund Vane's death, a coronary event, the paper said. At his home in Buckinghamshire, in the library of Vane House, found by his valet at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning and thinking about a conversation he had had 8 days earlier with a man who was now in the ground at St. Peter's Churchyard, Little Missenden, Edmund Vane had come to Whitehaven Mansions on a Thursday. He had sat in the chair across from Poirot's desk and he had said, "I believe someone is trying to kill me. I have no evidence. I have only the feeling, and I am not a man who trusts feelings, Monsieur Poirot. I have spent my professional life distrusting them that someone in my immediate circle has decided that I should not live much longer." Poirot had asked the questions. He had listened to the answers. He had agreed to look into the matter. 8 days later, Edmund Vane was dead of a coronary event. At 61 years old, with no significant history of cardiac disease, no previous episodes, no warning symptoms that his GP had noted in the 3 years of routine consultations he had attended, a man who rode twice a week, walked 4 miles daily, and who had been described by his physician in the brief statement issued to the press as in excellent health for his age. Poirot set down the newspaper. He picked up the telephone and called Japp. "Edmund Vane," he said. "The Buckinghamshire death. Has there been a post-mortem?" "Natural causes, Poirot. The GP certified it. Man was 61, hard-working businessman, found dead in his library. These things happen." "They do," Poirot said. "They also happen to be arranged on occasion. This man came to me 8 days ago. He told me someone intended to kill him. A silence on the line that Japp used for thinking. Then, why didn't you report it?" "He had no evidence. He had an instinct. I was in the process of gathering information when the death occurred." A pause. "I am still in the process of gathering information, but now the information I need is different." "What do you need?" "I need to be at Vane House in Buckinghamshire this afternoon," Poirot said. "The family will be assembling after the funeral. There will be, I believe, a reading of the will. I need to be present." "You're not a solicitor, Poirot. You can't attend a will reading." "I am a detective who has been specifically engaged by the deceased," Poirot said. "I have a letter to that effect, signed by Edmund Vane 8 days ago. I intend to present it." "No." Another silence. Then, "I'll drive you, please," Poirot said, "and bring your authority, Japp. I think we may need it before the evening is over." The house had been built in the early 1900s by Edmund Vane's grandfather, a man of industrial wealth and Victorian aesthetic confidence, who had wanted something that looked as though it had been standing for 3 centuries and had employed an architect willing to help with the seedy deception. The result was a long, low house of Chiltern flint and red brick, with mullioned windows and a square tower at the east end that served no structural purpose but looked, in the right light, like it had been there since the Tudors. Poirot and Japp arrived at 3:30, when the funeral party had returned from the churchyard and the house was in the particular state of suspended animation that follows the formal procedures of death, the coats removed, the hats put down, the ceremony over, and the ordinary world pressing back in around the edges of the grief with its usual implacable requirements. A housekeeper let them in. She was a composed, efficient woman called Mrs. Doone, who had been with the household for 12 years and who received Poirot's letter of engagement with the careful non-expression of a woman processing an unexpected development while revealing nothing about her response to it. "I'll tell Mrs. Vane you're here," she said. She came back 3 minutes later. "Mrs. Vane will see you in the morning room," she said. "Mr. Carey, the solicitor, will be with her. The will reading is at 4 o'clock. The morning room was at the back of the house, looking out over a garden that had been splendid in the summer and was now doing its dignified autumn diminishment. The roses pruned back, the borders cleared, the lawn a darker green in the November damp. Diana Vane stood at the window with her back to the room when they entered, and she remained at the window for a moment after they came in, which was either composure or something being managed, and Poirot noted the distinction. She turned. She was 54. She had been beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, not the obvious way, not the way that everyone sees immediately, but the deeper way that becomes more apparent with time, built on good bones and the quality of a face that has been animated by intelligence for half a century. She was in full mourning black, and it suited her in the slightly uncomfortable way that black sometimes suits people, as though they had been waiting for the occasion to wear it. Her eyes were dry. They had perhaps been wet earlier, perhaps at the graveside, but they were dry now and clear and appraising. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "my husband mentioned you." A pause. "He mentioned you 8 days ago when he came back from London. He said he had consulted you. He didn't say about what. I assumed, after what happened, that whatever he had consulted you about had resolved itself." "It has not resolved itself," Poirot said. "I regret to tell you, madam, that I believe the matter your husband consulted me about is directly connected to his death." Diana Vane looked at him, not with shock, with the particular steady attention of someone absorbing a thing they have been, in some part of themselves, already considering. "Sit down," she said, "both of you. Mr. Carey will be here shortly. I think you should stay for the will reading." "I intend to," Poirot said. He sat, and as he sat, he did what he always did in the first minutes in a new room. He looked, not at Diana Vane, though he had looked at her carefully already. He looked at the room itself, at the objects it contained, the arrangement of the furniture, the photographs on the mantelpiece, the desk in the corner, the flowers, white, funeral flowers, arrangements that had been brought back from the church and placed here in the domestic space, with the slightly incongruous quality of ceremonial objects in an ordinary setting. On the desk in the corner, a letter, half-written, the pen still uncapped beside it. Diana had been writing something when the cars returned from the church. She had left it mid-sentence. On the mantelpiece, 3 photographs. Edmund Vane and Diana, on what appeared to be their wedding day, both young, both formal, both with the particular expression of people being photographed at a significant moment. A second photograph of 2 young adults, the son and daughter, Poirot assumed. The third photograph was older, black and white, showing a group of people on the steps of a building he didn't recognize. Edmund Vane was among them, 20 years younger, standing beside a man of similar age and the kind of easy physical confidence that money and success produce in people who have had them long enough. Poirot did not recognize the other man. He noted this. He noted the way the photograph was positioned, not prominently, pushed slightly to the back, behind the other 2. Present, but not displayed. Kept, but not celebrated. The door opened and Mr. Carey arrived. Godfrey Carey was 60, small and precise, with the careful, non-committal manner of a solicitor who has seen enough family dynamics around wills to have learned that the wisest professional posture is one of absolute neutrality. He registered Poirot's presence with a slight adjustment of his composure and said, after Diana had explained the letter of engagement, "I see. Well, the family is assembling in the drawing room. Given Mr. Vane's engagement of you, I suppose there is no legal impediment to your presence, Monsieur Poirot. Though I should say that the contents of the will are, in the ordinary course." "The contents of the will," Poirot said pleasantly, "are likely to be relevant to my investigation. I will be discreet." Carey looked at him. "Investigation," he said. "You believe Edmund Vane's death was not natural. I believe it requires examination. Carey was quiet for a moment. Something crossed his face, not surprise, exactly. More the expression of a man whose privately held suspicion has just been given external confirmation. "I see," he said again. And this time the words carried a different weight. The drawing room at Vane House was large, high-ceilinged, furnished with the accumulated comfort of several generations. 4 people were already assembled when Poirot and Japp entered with Diana and the solicitor. The son, Marcus Vane, 32, tall, with his father's build and his mother's colouring dark, fine-featured. He was standing near the fireplace with a glass of whiskey he was drinking with the steady, controlled purposefulness of a man using alcohol as professional equipment. He looked at Poirot with no visible welcome and said nothing. The daughter, Cesaly Vane, 29. She was sitting in the window seat with her knees drawn up slightly and her arms loosely crossed, not a defensive posture, but a self-contained one, the posture of someone who prefers to observe from an angle. She had her mother's bone structure, but something wilder in the face, or not wilder, more direct. She looked at Poirot with immediate, undisguised interest, which he found more informative than the brother's careful blankness. The business partner, Hugh Calloway, 58, who had built Vane and Calloway property with Edmund over 30 years and who was, according to everything Poirot had been able to establish in the past 8 days, the closest thing Edmund Vane had to a trusted friend. He was a large, heavy man with a florid complexion and the bearing of someone accustomed to filling rooms not aggressively, but simply by virtue of physical and social density. He was the only person in the room who appeared genuinely, uncomplicatedly sad. And one more, a woman Poirot had not expected. She was sitting in the chair nearest the door, the least prominent chair, the chair of someone who is present but uncertain of their right to be prominent. She was perhaps 45, dressed in dark clothes that were not quite mourning and not quite ordinary, with a carefully composed face and hands folded in her lap, and the particular quality of someone who has arrived somewhere at considerable personal cost and is now waiting to discover whether the cost was worth it. Poirot did not know her. He looked at Diana Vane, who had entered behind him, and he saw Diana Vane look at the woman in the chair nearest the door, with an expression that lasted perhaps 1 second and then was gone. An expression composed of recognition and something more complex, something that had been prepared for but was still, despite the preparation, not easy to see. "Monsieur Poirot," Diana said, with the controlled grace of a woman who has decided that the best management of an unexpected situation is to take possession of it immediately. "This is Mrs. Irene Moss. She was a friend of my husband's." She said the word friend, the way people say words when the word is technically accurate but functionally incomplete. Irene Moss looked up at Poirot. Her eyes were red. She had been crying recently, genuinely, with the unself-conscious grief of someone who is not performing sadness but experiencing it. She was the only person in the room, Poirot noted, who had clearly wept. "How do you do?" she said, with the slightly automatic courtesy of someone whose manners are so deeply trained they operate independently of circumstance. Carey opened his file. The will reading began. Edmund Vane's will had been most recently amended 14 months ago. Carey read it in the measured, slightly accelerated tone of a professional who has read many wills and understands that the document's emotional content is not diminished by the efficiency of its delivery. The house and its contents, to Diana Vane, absolutely. The shareholding in Vane and Calloway property, 50% to Marcus Vane, 25% to Cesaly Vane, 25% to Hugh Calloway, a sum of £40,000 to Marcus Vane, a sum of £20,000 to Cesaly Vane, a personal bequest of £15,000, along with the contents of a specific safety deposit box at a specific branch of Barclays in London, to Mrs. Irene Moss. The room received this information in various ways. Marcus Vane's whiskey glass stopped moving halfway to his mouth. It remained there for 2 seconds, and then completed its journey with elaborate casualness. Cesaly watched her brother with the detached interest of a scientist observing an expected reaction. Hugh Calloway looked at the floor. Diana Vane looked at the middle distance, with the precise stillness of a woman who has known about this provision for some time and has had 14 months to construct her relationship with it. Irene Moss closed her eyes, not with relief, with something more private than relief. "The safety deposit box," Poirot said after a moment. It was not his place to speak during a will reading. He spoke anyway, with the pleasant directness of a man who has decided that the usual rules are less urgent than the present situation. "Mr. Carey, are you aware of the contents of the box?" Carey looked at him with the expression of a man weighing his professional obligations against the evident purposefulness of the small Belgian. "Mr. Vane informed me that the box contained personal correspondence and certain documents of a private nature. He was specific that the box was to go to Mrs. Moss intact, unopened. Has it been retrieved?" "Not yet. The process requires—" "It requires," Poirot said, "a death certificate, identification, and the legal authority of the beneficiary or her authorized representative. None of these presents an insurmountable obstacle." He looked at Irene Moss. "Madame Moss, I would like to speak with you privately before you leave Vane House today." She looked at him. Her red-rimmed eyes were steadier now, with the box's bequest acknowledged, the room's reactions absorbed. "All right," she said. Marcus set his glass down on the mantelpiece with a precise, deliberate sound. "I'd like to know," he said, addressing Poirot rather than the room, "exactly what you're doing here. My father is dead. Whatever he may have consulted you about is over. I don't see the relevance of a detective at a family." "Your father came to me 8 days before his death," Poirot said, equally directly, "and told me he believed someone intended to kill him. He is now dead of a cardiac event for which there was no clinical preparation or warning. Whether these facts are connected is what I am here to determine." The silence that followed was the quality of silence that a room produces when everyone in it processes the same information differently and simultaneously. Hugh Calloway looked up from the floor. Cesaly Vane's knees came down from the window seat. Marcus's face performed something complicated and then smoothed. Diana Vane said, very quietly, "Edmund told me he had consulted you. He didn't tell me what he said. He said," she stopped. "He said, if anything happened, I should trust you. He said the same thing in the letter he gave me," Poirot said. "I intend to deserve it." The library. Poirot had asked for the library specifically, not the morning room where Diana had received them, not the drawing room with its collective weight of family dynamics, but the library, which was the room where Edmund Vane had died, and which was therefore the room where Poirot needed to begin. Mrs. Doone, the housekeeper, led him and Irene Moss there with the composed discretion of a woman who has understood that unusual things are happening and has decided that her role is to facilitate them efficiently. The library was a long room on the house's ground floor, its walls lined with books that had actually been read. Poirot noticed this. Noticed the variation in the shelving, the gaps where books had been removed and not replaced in order, the slight disorder of a working library rather than a decorative one. Edmund Vane's desk occupied the far end, facing the room, an armchair near the cold fireplace, a side table with a decanter of brandy, and 2 glasses, one clean, one used, both noted by Poirot immediately. 2 glasses. The police, arriving to certify a natural death, had not seen the significance of 2 glasses. Poirot saw it as soon as he entered the room, with the quiet but immediate attention it deserved. He said nothing about it yet. He sat across from Irene Moss in the 2 chairs by the cold fireplace, and he asked her to tell him about Edmund Vane. She told him. "It was not," she said, "what people assumed." She knew what people assumed. She was not naive, and she had been a grown woman in a complicated situation for 6 years, and she had long since made her peace with the assumptions. But the truth was different from the assumptions, and the truth mattered now. She had met Edmund Vane at a charity event in London 6 years ago. She was a widow. Her husband had died 4 years before that, of an illness, without drama or complication, leaving her with a modest income and a flat in Kensington, and the slightly surprising freedom of a woman in her 40s who no longer has to organize her life around another person's requirements. She had not been looking for anything. She did not think Edmund had been looking for anything either. They had talked at a dinner table for 3 hours, and something had recognized something, and they had, subsequently, met regularly for coffee, and then for lunch, and then for the kind of dinners in quiet restaurants, where the portions are small and the evenings are long. They had not been lovers. She said this plainly and without defensiveness, looking at Poirot with the steady eyes of someone telling a specific truth, because it matters precisely. "We were friends," she said. "The most important kind. The kind you find when you are old enough to know what friendship actually is." He told me things he didn't tell Diana. Not because Diana wouldn't have understood them, but because there are things a person needs to say outside the structure of a marriage, outside the architecture of how other people see you. He told me about the business and his fears for it, about Marcus and his complicated feelings about Marcus, about the thing that was worrying him. "What was worrying him?" Poirot said. "The same thing he told you, I imagine, that someone close to him wanted him dead." She looked at her hands. "He told me 4 weeks before he died. He had become not paranoid. Edmund was too rational for paranoia, but alert. The way someone is alert when they have begun to notice small things that individually mean nothing and collectively mean something." She paused. "He told me about a conversation he had overheard in his own house. Tell me, 3 weeks before he died, he had returned to Vane House from a trip to Bristol business. He came back a day earlier than expected. The house was quiet when he arrived. It was late afternoon, mid-week. The staff were on their half-day. He said he heard voices in the library. 2 voices. He went to the door. It was partly open and listened. Who was speaking? Marcus, she said, and a man whose voice Edmund didn't recognize. They were speaking quietly. Edmund caught only fragments. But the fragments were... She stopped. Edmund wrote it down. That night, in his study, he wrote down what he had heard. I have a copy. He gave me a copy because he said he wanted someone outside the house to have it. She opened her bag and produced a folded piece of paper. Poirot read it. Edmund Vane's handwriting. He recognized it from the letter of engagement in slightly uneven lines, the slightly uneven lines of a man writing from agitation rather than composure. Marcus. From the library doorway. Can't keep waiting for it to happen naturally. Calloway is already asking questions about the Eastern portfolio. Unknown man. The Eastern portfolio is the least of it. Once the audit. Marcus. The audit won't matter if the sound of movement. Did not hear the following. Unknown man. Before the end of the year, it has to be. Marcus. I know, but there needs to be a reason, something that makes sense. The paper ended there. Edmund had drawn a line beneath the fragments and written, I do not know what the Eastern portfolio is. I do not know what audit. I do not know what Marcus is planning, but the words, before the end of the year, and something that makes sense in the context of a conversation about timing, I know what they mean. Poirot folded the paper and placed it carefully in his breast pocket. The Eastern portfolio, he said. Do you know what it is? No, but I know someone who might. Hugh Calloway. Edmund trusted him. He had been on the point of speaking to Calloway about it, about everything, when he died. And the safety deposit box, Poirot said. Edmund told Carey it contained personal correspondence and private documents. What else is in it, Madame Moss? She looked at him steadily. Everything he had gathered in the 3 weeks before he died. Whatever he found when he started looking at the business records, the ones Marcus had access to. He was meticulous. Edmund, he kept copies of everything, dated and annotated. He told me, the last time we met 5 days before he died, that he had found something in the accounts that he couldn't explain, and that he was going to bring it to a solicitor at the end of the week. He came to me before the solicitor, Poirot said. He came to you first because he trusted his instinct more than the law's timetable, Irene said. He said he thought the instinct might need to move faster. He had been right about that. 8 days had been too long. One more question, Poirot said. The 2 glasses on the side table. There, he gestured. One used, one clean. Did Edmund habitually drink brandy alone in the library? Irene looked at the table. He drank brandy occasionally. Alone, yes, sometimes. A pause. But he was meticulous about he would have washed up a used glass. Or left it for Mrs. Doone, in the kitchen. He wouldn't have left a used glass on the side table unless the glass was not his, Poirot said. Unless someone else had been in the library that evening. Someone who had a drink and left the glass and left Edmund Vane behind them. The library was very quiet. Hugh Calloway was in the garden. Poirot found him there after leaving Irene Moss in the library, standing at the far end of the autumn lawn near the rose beds, smoking a cigar with the focused, meditative quality of a man who uses the physical activity of smoking as a structure for thought. He heard Poirot's footsteps on the gravel path and turned, and his large, florid face showed a combination of grief and something else, the something else being, Poirot assessed, relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. "Mr. Calloway," Poirot said, "you know why I am here." "I know why Edmund consulted you," Calloway said. "He mentioned it. We talked most things through. 30 years of business will do that." He drew on the cigar. "I'm glad he did. I'm sorry it wasn't enough. Tell me about the Eastern portfolio." Calloway looked at him. Then he looked at the rose beds, at the brown stripped canes that would be roses again in 6 months. "The Eastern portfolio is a set of property investments on the eastern edge of the business development sites in Essex and Kent, acquired over the past 3 years. They were Marcus's projects. Edmund gave Marcus significant autonomy. 18 months ago it was planned, a staged handover of operational responsibility. Marcus was going to take over the running of the business eventually. The Eastern portfolio was his proof of concept. A pause. "Edmund asked me, 2 weeks before he died, to look at the Eastern portfolio accounts, quietly, without telling Marcus." "And what did you find?" "Nothing wrong with the investments themselves," Calloway said carefully. "The sites are real. The valuations are they're aggressive, but property valuations always are in a rising market. The transactions are documented." He paused. "What I found was a pattern. Several of the Eastern portfolio sites were acquired through a purchasing intermediary, a company called Moreland Land Holdings. I didn't recognize the name. I looked it up. Moreland is registered in Jersey. Its beneficial ownership is obscured in the way that Jersey company structures obscure things, meaning it was difficult to identify who ultimately owned Moreland Land Holdings, meaning it was difficult for me. I am a property developer, not a forensic accountant. But Edmund was better with numbers than I was, always. He spent those last 2 weeks going through the acquisition records. He found..." Calloway stopped. He drew on the cigar again, a long considering draw. He found that Moreland Land Holdings had, in several of the Eastern portfolio transactions, purchased sites from Vane and Calloway's own subsidiary land bank at below-market valuations, and then sold them back to Vane and Calloway's development arm at a premium, the round trip. The money moved from the company, through Moreland, back to the company, and at each stage, Moreland took a margin. And Moreland's beneficial owner was... "We couldn't prove it," Calloway said. "Edmund couldn't prove it. That was the problem. The Jersey structure was designed to prevent proof. But the pattern of the transactions, the timing, the specific sites, Edmund was certain. He told me, there is only one person who could have directed these transactions from inside the company. One person who had the access and the authority. Marcus," Poirot said. "Marcus." Calloway looked at the dead rose canes. His own son, running a fraud through the company he was going to inherit, taking money from the business he was being given. He was quiet for a moment. "I asked Edmund. I asked him how much. He said he thought, across the 3 years of the Eastern portfolio, the margin Moreland had extracted was somewhere between 800,000 and £1.5 million. The garden was very still in the November afternoon. "And the audit," Poirot said. Edmund overheard Marcus say the audit. Calloway turned. Vane and Calloway has an annual external audit. It begins in January. Edmund had noted, in his records, that the audit of the previous year had produced some queries about the Eastern portfolio's acquisition costs that had been answered by Marcus with documentation that Edmund, in retrospect, he searched for the word, found too neat. The documentation answered the questions too precisely, as though the questions had been anticipated, as though someone had known what the auditors were going to ask. Yes. Calloway paused. The next audit begins in 6 weeks. Marcus would have known that. He would have known that in 6 weeks, with Edmund alive and active and increasingly asking questions, the January audit might produce questions that could not be answered too neatly a second time. He met Poirot's eyes, and he would have known that with Edmund dead, the audit would be managed by whoever took operational control of the business, which would be Marcus. Poirot looked at the house, at the long flint and brick facade, the mullioned windows, the square tower that was older than it appeared. In one of those windows, he could see a figure, just a shape, standing back from the glass, not quite visible, watching the garden. "The man in the library," Poirot said. 3 weeks ago, when Edmund overheard, the voice he didn't recognize. "Have you any idea who that might have been?" Calloway's jaw tightened. "I have a suspicion. There's a man, Desmond Falk, who runs Moreland Land Holdings. I found his name eventually, through a contact at a Jersey law firm who owed me a favor. He is a specialist in structured property transactions and company vehicles. He has a professional history of setting up arrangements of the kind I've described." A pause. "He has also, I believe, a criminal record. Abroad. Nothing prosecuted in England, but the kind of record that suggests he is comfortable with risk. And you believe it was Falk in the library?" "I believe Falk is Marcus's instrument," Calloway said. "The man who built the structure, who managed Moreland, who moved the money. And who Marcus would have needed to consult as the noose began to tighten as Edmund started asking questions as the audit approached. He looked at Poirot directly, and who might have provided something other than financial services if the situation required it. The brandy glass on the side table in the library had not been touched since Edmund Vane's body was removed. Poirot established this through Mrs. Doone, who was precise in her account. The library had been entered by the family and the GP on the morning of the discovery, then by the police constable, who came to confirm natural causes, then sealed on Poirot's request as a consequence of his arriving with Japp's authority. No one had cleaned the room. The side table was as it had been found. Poirot examined the used glass with his magnifying glass in the afternoon light. He decanted the tiny residue from the glass's base into a small evidence envelope Japp had provided the means, which meant Japp had anticipated the need, which meant Japp had drawn his own conclusions from the conversation in the car. "If it's what I think it is," Japp said, standing in the library doorway, "the lab will need time." "How much time?" "If I push 24 hours, perhaps less. The death certificate has been issued. The funeral has occurred. The window for challenging the official cause of death closes, with a sworn statement from you about Edmund Vane's visit and his stated belief that his life was in danger, and the supporting evidence of the overheard conversation and the business fraud. I can get an order for a post-mortem within the hour." Japp looked at the glass. "The question is what the post-mortem finds." "The question," Poirot said, "is what was in the glass, and who put it there." He stood and looked at the room. He had been looking at it in sections since they arrived: the desk, the bookshelves, the side table, the fireplace, the window. Now he looked at it as a whole, as a space that had contained a specific sequence of events on a specific evening. Edmund Vane had been found dead in the morning by his valet. The valet's statement, which Japp had obtained, said that the library had appeared undisturbed, the desk lamp still on, a book open on the desk, Edmund in the armchair near the cold fireplace. Not at the desk, in the armchair. He had not been working when he died. He had been sitting, with someone. 2 glasses, one used, one untouched. The untouched glass was Edmund's, set out for a visitor, then not used. The visitor had drunk. Edmund had not. Or Edmund had declined the brandy he had poured for his guest. Or Edmund had understood, at some point in the evening, that something was wrong. Had Edmund poured the drinks himself? Or had the visitor arrived, with the drink prepared? Poirot looked at the decanter. Expensive crystal, a quarter full. He examined it. Then, the unused glass. Then, the bottle of brandy on the lower shelf of the side table, which was the bottle presumably used to fill the decanter. The seal on the brandy bottle had been broken and replaced. Not perfectly, there was a slight misalignment in the foil seal at the neck, the kind of misalignment produced when a seal is reapplied by hand rather than machine. The bottle had been opened, brandy had been removed, and the bottle had been resealed. Poirot looked at Japp. "Not the glass," he said. "The bottle. The bottle was the delivery mechanism. Something was added to the brandy in the decanter. Edmund poured for his guest. The guest declined or had their own glass, prepared separately. Edmund drank from his own house's brandy, from the decanter in his own library, and died. Without knowing," Japp said. "Without knowing. Because the substance, whatever it is, was in the decanter that always sat on that table, that Edmund poured from habitually, that any member of the household or regular visitor could have accessed." He paused. "It did not require a confrontation. It did not require presence at the moment of death. It required access to the decanter on any of the occasions before that evening, and patience." "Patience," Japp said. "And a guest," Poirot said. "Because there were two glasses. Someone was here that evening. Someone who sat with Edmund, perhaps in these chairs, and had a glass of brandy that was not from the decanter, and then left. And then Edmund drank from his own glass. And then Edmund died." He looked at the armchair. "The guest may not have known, or the guest may have known exactly. The two glasses may represent either an intimate betrayal or an innocent coincidence. He needed to know which." Cesaly Vane was still in the window seat when Poirot found her. The house had shifted in the late afternoon, the solicitor gone, Calloway gone. Irene Moss, collected by a taxi with the quiet restraint of someone who knows their presence has been noted and does not wish to be the cause of further complication. Diana was upstairs. Marcus had taken himself somewhere. His departure communicated in the specific quality of his absence felt rather than observed. Cesaly had not moved from the window. She was reading or holding a book, which is related but different. She looked up when Poirot came in and set the book down immediately, which told him she had been waiting rather than reading. "I wondered when you'd get to me," she said. "Your brother first," Poirot said. "Marcus isn't talking to you. He left 20 minutes ago, went to his flat in London. I heard the car." Poirot sat. He looked at Cesaly Vane, 29 years old, with her mother's face and her father's eyes, and the particular quality he had noticed when he first came into this room, the quality of someone who observes more than they reveal, and whose silence is not the silence of ignorance, but of selection. "You know something," Poirot said, not accusingly, observationally. Cesaly looked at the window. Outside, the light was going the fast blue November dusk, the garden becoming shadow. "I've known something for 4 months, she said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure it was what I thought it was. And then my father died, and it became..." She stopped. Suddenly everything I'd been uncertain about became very clear, and very terrible, and very much too late. "Tell me." 4 months ago, she said. "July. I came to Vane House for a weekend. I was living in Oxford at the time. I hadn't been here in a couple of months. I arrived Friday evening. My father was in London overnight. My mother was visiting my aunt in Norfolk. The house Marcus was here, and I found Marcus in the library with a man I didn't recognize." "Day, Falk," Poirot said. She looked at him sharply. "You know about Falk. I know the name. Tell me what you saw." "They were at my father's desk," she said. "Marcus was showing the man something documents, I think, from the desk drawer. They didn't hear me come in. I'd left my coat in the library that morning. I just pushed the door open." She paused. They stopped very quickly. The man put whatever they were looking at behind his back. Marcus introduced him as a business colleague. The name he gave it wasn't Falk. I didn't know the name Falk until just now, when I heard Mr. Calloway use it in the garden. The name Marcus gave me was different. A false name? I think so, yes. The man he had a particular quality. The quality of someone who is comfortable in situations where other people are not. He shook my hand and smiled and said something pleasant and looked at me with eyes that were assessing, calculating exactly what I knew and exactly what I'd do with it. And what did you do with it? Nothing, then, because I didn't know what I'd seen. Business documents in a library that could be anything. I told myself it was nothing. I was very good at telling myself things were nothing for 4 months. She looked at the floor. And then I went to the library. 2 weeks ago, I was visiting again. My father had asked me to come. I didn't understand why at the time, but he seemed like he wanted family around him, wanted to see people, and I found something. What? A piece of paper, on the floor, under the desk. Fallen from something, I think, or left accidentally. A printout of a bank transfer statement between companies I didn't recognize, for an amount. She stopped. A very large amount. I put it in my pocket. I meant to ask my father about it. I was going to ask him that evening, and then after dinner he seemed tired, and I thought I'd ask in the morning. And in the morning, she looked at the floor. In the morning he was dead, she said. You have the printout. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced a folded paper. Poirot took it and read it. A bank transfer record, one of the Eastern Portfolio transaction records, he suspected, or something adjacent to it. 2 company names, one of which he recognized as a Vane and Calloway subsidiary. The other was Moorland Land Holdings. The amount was £340,000, dated 11 months ago. He placed it carefully with Irene Moss's paper in his breast pocket. Mademoiselle Vane, he said. The evening your father died, he was found in the morning by his valet. He had been alone the previous evening. This is what the household understood. But there were 2 glasses in the library. Was anyone with him that evening? Cesaly looked at him. Marcus came, she said. Marcus called me in the afternoon and told me he was driving down to Vane House that evening to see father. He said he wanted to sort things out between them. There was a tension those last weeks. I could feel it without understanding it. She paused. I asked Marcus later after the death whether he had come. He said no. He said something had come up and he hadn't made the drive after all. She looked at Poirot steadily. But I called Mrs. Doone that evening. At about 9. I was checking in on my father. I'd been worried about him. Mrs. Doone said he was in the library with Mr. Marcus and not to be disturbed. The room was very quiet. Marcus was here, Poirot said. Marcus was here. And then my father was dead. And Marcus told me he had never come. She met his eyes. So yes, Monsieur Poirot, I know something. I've known it since the morning my father didn't come down for breakfast. I didn't want to know it. Because knowing it means your brother killed your father, Poirot said very quietly. Cesaly Vane looked at the window, at the dark garden, at the last thin line of light on the western horizon. Yes, she said, it means that. Japp made 4 telephone calls from the library of Vane House between 6 and 8 o'clock that evening. The first was to the laboratory. The residue from the brandy glass and a sample from the decanter were being couriered from Buckinghamshire by police motorcycle. Priority analysis. The second was to the coroner's office. An order for a post-mortem on Edmund Vane, whose body was now in the care of the undertakers who had handled the funeral, was in process. The funeral had occurred, but the interment had not yet been completed. The coffin remained in the funeral home overnight before the burial scheduled for the following day. There was, still, a window. The third call was to the Jersey Financial Crimes Unit. The name Desmond Falk, the name Moorland Land Holdings, the pattern of transactions Calloway had described, all of it was now formally in motion. The fourth call was to a detective sergeant in Mayfair, where Marcus Vane had a flat. Poirot stood in the library while Japp made the calls, and looked at the desk and the armchair and the cold fireplace and the 2 glasses, one now in an evidence bag, one still on the table, and thought about a father and a son sitting in this room on a November evening. One of them knowing what was in the decanter, the other not. The thing about this kind of murder, the patient, prepared, domestic kind, was that it required the murderer to perform normality in proximity to the victim, to sit in the same room, to talk, to accept whatever the conversation required, while knowing what was in the brandy, to perform a visit, a family evening, a sorting things out, while the clock ran. What did they talk about? What does a man talk about with his son when the son has come to watch him die? Poirot did not know. He would perhaps never know. It was the part of this kind of crime that the investigation could not recover, not the mechanism, which was recoverable, not the motive, which was reconstructible, but the texture of the last evening. What was said between the decanter and the dark? Japp finished his calls. "The post-mortem will be tomorrow morning," he said. "The analysis from the lab will be back by midnight at the latest if they push. And Marcus? His flat is under observation. He hasn't left since he arrived." Japp paused. "We can't arrest him yet. We need the post-mortem. We need the lab results. We need the financial fraud evidence to be formally established. And even then, Poirot, a clever barrister, will argue that the fraud and the murder are separate questions." "They are not separate questions," Poirot said. "They are the same question with a single answer. Edmund discovered the fraud. The fraud was large enough to mean prison and the destruction of everything Marcus stood to inherit. Edmund was 8 days away from bringing it to a solicitor. The timing of the death, relative to the discovery of the fraud, is circumstantial," Japp said. "Without the toxicology, it's circumstantial. Then we wait for the toxicology." They waited. Diana Vane found Poirot in the library at 9 o'clock. She brought 2 cups of tea, which was the particular English management of the unmanageable, the production of tea in circumstances where nothing practical can be done. She set 1 cup in front of Poirot and kept 1 for herself, and sat in the chair Cesaly had occupied earlier. In the window, the dark garden behind her. "Do you think Marcus killed him?" she said. Not a question, really. The question had been settled somewhere in her during the hours since the will reading. What she was asking was whether Poirot would confirm what she already knew. "I believe he did," Poirot said. "The evidence is being assembled. It is not yet complete." Diana looked at her tea. "I have been sitting with this all afternoon," she said. The idea of it. Edmund was not. He was not always an easy man. He was sometimes distant and sometimes preoccupied, and sometimes managing things instead of feeling them. But he did not deserve. She stopped. "No one deserves to be killed by their own child. No one." "No," Poirot said. "They do not." "What made Marcus?" She started the question and stopped it. "No, I know what made Marcus. I've been watching it build for years. The sense of entitlement, the impatience. Edmund gave him autonomy, and Marcus mistook it. He thought the autonomy meant there was no oversight coming. He thought being trusted meant not being watched." She looked at the window. He was like someone who borrows against a future inheritance and then finds the inheritance is more complicated than expected. "The Eastern portfolio," Poirot said. He had been taking money from the business for 3 years, an escalating amount. By the time Edmund found it, Marcus was already beyond the point where a conversation, a family accounting, an agreed repayment would resolve it. The amounts were too large, the methods were too deliberate. It was not a young man helping himself from petty cash. It was a structured fraud. "He could have come to us," Diana said. "If he needed money, if there was something." "He didn't need money," Poirot said gently. "He wanted it, and then he wanted more, and then he built a structure to take it quietly, and the structure was so elegant that he perhaps believed it would never be found. And then it was found. And the man who found it was the one person in the world Marcus could not argue with, could not manage, could not redirect." He paused, and so he made another kind of calculation. Diana was quiet for a long time. The house around them settled the nighttime sounds of an old building, the creak of wood, the movement of the heating system, the faint voice of the wind at the windows. Edmund trusted him. she said at last. That is the part that is what I keep coming back to. Edmund trusted Marcus with the business, with the autonomy, with the staged handover. He was proud of Marcus, and Marcus used the trust as access, Poirot said. That is the nature of this kind of betrayal. It requires the relationship to be real in order to function. A stranger cannot commit this particular crime. At 11:14 that night, Japp's telephone rang in the library of Vane House. Poirot was present. Diana had gone upstairs an hour earlier. Mrs. Doone had left supper on a tray and retired. The house was quiet, with the specific quiet of a building that has had too much happen in it in one day and is resting. Japp answered. He listened for 4 minutes, saying very little a yes. A clarify that, another yes. When he put the phone down, he looked at Poirot with the expression of a man whose analysis has been confirmed and who is not glad to be right. Aconitine, he said. In the brandy decanter, a dose sufficient to produce cardiac arrhythmia and death within 1 to 3 hours of ingestion. The glass residue confirms the same compound. The body, he paused. The post-mortem isn't until morning, but with this result, the pathologist is confident of confirming it in the tissue. Aconitine, the alkaloid of Aconitum napellus monkshood, wolfsbane, a substance that produced exactly the presentation the GP had seen and had attributed to natural cardiac failure. A substance whose effects were, without specific toxicological testing, indistinguishable from a natural cardiac event in a man of 61. A substance that required knowledge, preparation, access. The garden, Poirot said. Japp looked at him. Vane House has an extensive garden, Poirot said. I would wish, in the morning, to have someone examine the garden carefully. Specifically, the herbaceous borders. Monkshood is a common garden plant, those tall purple spires that look so innocent in an English herbaceous border. It is possible, in a garden this size, that no one has noticed its presence or its particular utility. Japp was already reaching for the telephone. The arrest of Marcus Vane was made at his Mayfair flat at 7:30 the following morning. Poirot was not present. He was at Vane House, in the garden, with Japp's sergeant and a list of plants that Mrs. Doone, who knew every inch of the garden after 12 years, identified with the complete confidence of a woman who prided herself on knowing her territory. The monkshood was in the east border. It had been there, Mrs. Doone said, for as long as she had been at Vane House, planted by the previous head gardener 20 years ago for its colour and its height in the late summer border. She had never thought twice about it, because no one had ever suggested she should. The east border also showed, when examined closely by the sergeant, a patch of disturbed soil at the base of one of the monkshood plants, disturbed and then carefully redressed, but disturbed recently enough that the settlement was not complete. Something had been taken from the root, which is where the plant's alkaloid concentration is highest. Poirot stood in the autumn garden and looked at the plant, those innocent purple spires now dry and dormant in the November cold, and thought about the patience involved. The calculation, the months of running a financial fraud, the discovery of the fraud by a father who had trusted too completely, the decision made in the cold space between discovery and consequence. The walk across this garden to the east border, the knowledge, and Marcus Vane, as his father's son, had grown up in this garden, had known this garden since childhood.